Did the FBI really try to start a violent street war between the Italian-American mafia and American communists? Did it encourage a black street gang leader to assassinate a leading civil rights activist? Did it have serial killings on its books? Was it a major creator of fake news? What about the assassinations of JFK and MLK? Were we told the truth and nothing but the truth? This show is about those secrets. Secrets from the darkest corners of American law enforcement. Number 50. Seek and Destroy. In 1956, the FBI launched COINTELPRO, a program that at first was to snuff out possible communists in the US, but evolved into the FBI going after civil rights groups, socialists, feminists, anti-war activists, actors, pop singers, writers, artists, and anyone else they deemed to be dangerous to the status quo. A now declassified FBI memo said the agent should expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize such groups or people. You can guess what neutralizing could mean. The FBI was deadly serious. As you'll see throughout the video, the FBI's actions at times wouldn't have looked out of place in bloodthirsty dictatorships. A difference was their objective was to polarize society and get people to hate, fear, or even kill each other rather than using excessive force themselves. However, as you'll see, excessive force did happen. Let's now go down an FBI rabbit hole, maybe one of the darkest rabbit holes you've never heard of, in which the FBI were the good guys. Kind of. Number 49. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. This one is an example of how the CIA and FBI worked at cross purposes at times, always in secret, of course. Speaking of dictators who were partial to torture and murder, let us introduce Rafael El Jefe Leonidas Trujillo, the ruthless maniac who ruled the Dominican Republic from 1930 to 1961 with what you might call an iron fist with spikes on it. As you probably know, during the Cold War, the CIA helped overthrow democracies if those democracies did not play ball with American corporations or were considered overly leftist or nationalistic. In some cases, it was just about leaders trying to nationalize their country's natural resources or give land rights to the poor, which didn't bode well for their relationship with various powerful people in the US. The CIA would effectively rearrange such nations, but it had no issues with El Jefe's Dominican Republic, which usually played ball. It was secretly supported with CIA money and outwardly supported by Vice President Richard Nixon. Dictators like El Jefe clamped down on entities like leftist labor unions or human rights activists. With that iron fist of his, he literally fed labor activists to the sharks. One of them was an FBI informant. His name was Jesus Galindez, an activist and academic who wrote scathing papers on the brutality happening in the country. As you can imagine, El Jefe didn't much like his barbarity being made public knowledge all over the world. He would have killed Galindez in a heartbeat, but Galindez skipped over to the US, where he thought he'd be safe. As we said, he'd actually secretly been working as an FBI informant, telling the FBI what he knew about former Nazis hiding out in Latin America. The FBI then asked him to spy on communist-affiliated people in the US who had joined the anti-Francisco Franco movement. Reports say Galindez refused to spy on certain communists, but he kept close ties with the FBI throughout his time in the US, where he taught at Columbia University. A declassified FBI report said Galindez was an invaluable informant, and his reports were extremely detailed, accurate, and thorough. This didn't bode well for him. Number 48. Breaking backs. Galindez was becoming a problem. He told an FBI agent in April 1955, while they were in Miami, that the U.S. Under-Secretary of State John Foster Dulles had helped create some of the blackest pages of international relations in Latin American history. This was because the U.S. was supporting a brutal dictator, which it would eventually do in other parts of Latin America and beyond. According to the book The Devil's Chessboard, Allen Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government, Galindez told the agent, "Never before in the history of the world has a government more effectively supported dictatorial powers in the free nations." Galindez was well known for bravely speaking his mind, but during the Cold War, that could seriously affect a person's life expectancy. Despite his criticism of Dulles, the FBI kept him on the payroll at $125 a month. He was useful, and for the FBI boss, J. Edgar Hoover, having an informant who had dirt on people was never a bad thing. The FBI secretly helped Galindez get American citizenship, but the agency knew his life was in danger when he was about to publish a long paper on El Jefe's brutality. 5 days before he vanished, the FBI wrote in a now declassified memo that Galindez's critical thesis on El Jefe would cause him some, quote, difficulties. The 450-page dissertation he wrote was published and soon became a bestseller in Latin America. To say he would have difficulties doing this was an understatement. The American historian Alan Wells wrote that Galíndez knew he was a dead man walking. Number 47. Hoover saw a dark conspiracy. One night after teaching a class at Columbia, Galíndez disappeared. No one knew at that point, not even the FBI, that employees had nabbed him at a private detective firm run by Robert A. Mayhew, a sketchy businessman who was close to the CIA but not close enough to not be expendable. His firm's agents were all former CIA and FBI agents. The agency was useful to CIA boss Allen Dulles, brother of John, who could use it for various secret and often dark activities, since his own CIA men were not supposed to do what they did inside the U.S. The CIA put Mayhew's agency on a $500 a month retainer. Mayhew is famous for being the man who offered Chicago Mafia mobster Johnny Rosselli $150,000 to assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro. That's what you get for $500 a month, a man who did your very shady business for you. Mayhew is less well known for helping to spirit Galíndez out of the U.S. He had his guys with a nurse drug Galíndez in the back of a limo, and then they threw him on a plane. You could only imagine what happened when El Jefe got hold of Galíndez. He reportedly had him hooked to a pulley, hoisted up and lowered into a vat of boiling water. He was boiled alive, and then the rest was thrown to the sharks. Another story says he was shot, but there were rumors that say El Jefe first made Galíndez eat his own feces and then boiled him in a cauldron at a warehouse near a sugar plantation. This was major news, given this man had gone missing from U.S. soil. The CIA under Dulles put pressure on the NYPD Intelligence Bureau officials to take care of this very delicate matter. Dulles also used friendly journalists to write misinformation about Galíndez running away with $1 million of CIA money. They called him a witting tool of the communists. But the smear campaign only worked for a certain amount of time. Still, it did what it was supposed to, make the public concentrate on the character, not the actual crime. Then the matters became even darker. The pilot who flew the plane that Galíndez was taken on, Gerald Murphy, had found out from seeing photos in the press who the guy was that he had on his plane. He got drunk a few too many times and told friends in bars about that fateful flight. It's reported that he bragged about possibly using that evidence for blackmail or other means of earning money, something El Jefe didn't exactly appreciate. It should be said, Murphy did not know the purpose of the flight when it happened. He'd become a mercenary pilot because he couldn't get into the Air Force. He was 23 and loved his exciting job, but he was not privy to everything going on around him. After telling the story a few too many times, he was never seen again. It's believed he also got the shark treatment after being hanged by El Jefe. The New York Times, citing someone's testimony, wrote in 1964, "The pilot crumpled to the ground, and the two policemen then placed a rope around his neck and each pulled it until Mr. Murphy was choked to death." Americans didn't know this at the time, but foul play was suspected after Murphy's Ford car was found abandoned near a slaughterhouse and he was missing. It became major news. It caused an uproar and the FBI took an interest. Hoover, who it said was furious about his valuable informant plus an American pilot being murdered, had his men investigate. Many years later, the agency would declassify 10,000 pages of records on the Galíndez kidnapping. In the 9 months after Galíndez was murdered, 5 other people were assassinated by El Jefe's men in what was an attempt at a cover-up. Murphy's co-pilot was offed, as was the nurse who administered the sedative to Galíndez, as were 2 airport employees and a colonel in El Jefe's security services. 3 of these people were American. This led to a young U.S. congressman named Charles Porter pushing for answers. Meanwhile, El Jefe spent millions trying to pull in favors. Alan Wells wrote, "Trujillo spent an estimated $6 million to discredit this victim, rehabilitate his image abroad, buy off witnesses, call in favors from U.S. senators and congressmen who he had wined and dined in the past, and bribe members of the Fourth Estate or journalists." Hoover discovered a dark underworld of sketchy former CIA agents and contract killers doing some very dirty work for dictators on American soil. He leaked the story to Life magazine, which ran the headline, "The Story of a Dark International Conspiracy." As you'll see later, the CIA and the FBI were experts at leaking stories to the media, sometimes untrue stories, but this one was real. Someone had to take the fall for Galíndez's death, and that man was a man named John Joseph Frank, a former FBI and CIA agent who was said to have arranged the kidnapping. The press didn't talk about Mayhew at the time. Frank had gone rogue, said the media, and was on the payroll of El Jefe. Some researchers believe that the CIA actually planned it with El Jefe, but that hasn't been proven. An American author and an attorney named Stuart McKeever filed a lawsuit against the CIA in 2013 in regard to the case. Frank's story appeared in the press while the Justice Department discussed it with the CIA. Dulles informed the department that this was a matter of national security. The Justice Department ended up having to let Frank get off with a mere fine after he threatened to subpoena several CIA agents. The CIA General Counsel, Lawrence Houston, is supposed to have said that the CIA would be embarrassed if it were forced to produce those witnesses. In the end, no one was ever charged with the murders of Murphy or Galindez or the others. The CIA evidently had enough of El Jefe by 1961 because it helped with his assassination. El Jefe's murder spree was just too much. He had to go. A declassified CIA internal memorandum disclosed the CIA's quite extensive agency involvement with the plotters. That's just a taste of how the FBI and the CIA didn't always meet eye to eye in those days. You'll see more of that later. Number 46. Reds under the bed. The U.S. went through a period of national hysteria when Senator Joseph McCarthy went on a witch hunt, alleging communists had infiltrated every part of the U.S. government, Hollywood, high society, just about everywhere else. He also went after alleged homosexuals since homosexuality was prohibited. He destroyed lives, he ruined careers, so naturally, the FBI's J. Edgar Hoover and the CIA's Allen Dulles made sure he couldn't come after them. Each of these men had compromising files on each other. One of the files Hoover had on McCarthy, should he ever need it, stated that there was evidence McCarthy had groped the breasts of girls. The Chicago Tribune once wrote that he couldn't keep his hands off young members of the opposite sex. The question is, did someone leak this story? Number 45. Dulles versus Hoover. Dulles and Hoover didn't much like each other. As we've just shown you, the FBI and CIA often worked at cross purposes. They were always looking for bigger budgets and more power. They were also very different, with Dulles being highly educated and quite posh, and Hoover being much more of a down-to-earth kind of guy. Hoover once called Dulles an arrogant, pompous Prussian, and another time he said he was a puffed-up nitwit. They were polite to each other, of course. In a declassified letter Dulles sent to Hoover in 1956, it read, "It's a fine tribute to a great organization of which our country is rightfully proud. I feel it a privilege to have had the opportunity which Zany's present work affords of working with you. Faithfully yours, Allen V. Dulles." Dulles, who some historians have said had psychopathic tendencies, was often very cold to his wife. He cheated on her constantly. Guess who knew? Hoover knew, and he kept a secret file on all of Dulles's extramarital activities just in case he one day needed it. Number 44. Dulles versus Hoover, solidarity. They also worked together. In 2014, the New York Times wrote the headline, "In Cold War, U.S. spy agencies used 1,000 Nazis." Dulles brought the Nazis to the U.S., and Hoover kept it quiet. The Times wrote, FBI officials refused to even tell the Justice Department's own Nazi hunters what they knew about 16 suspected Nazis living in the United States. Those 16 were informants for the FBI. The Times wrote that one of them was an SS officer, Otto von Bolschwing, who the Times said was a mentor and top aide to Adolf Eichmann, architect of the Final Solution, and wrote policy papers on how to terrorize Jews. This was hugely controversial when it came out in 1981 during a court case, but von Bolschwing was suffering from ill health at the time, and he died in a nursing home in sunny California in 1982. Number 43. Dulles versus Hoover 3. You won't be surprised to hear that Dulles had secret files on Hoover. It's well known that Hoover was close to his deputy, Clyde Tolson. They were like man and wife. They went everywhere together and spent Christmas together. The rumors about their homosexual relationship flooded Washington and beyond. Dulles told friends and allies that he had photographic evidence of Hoover and Tolson engaging in oral sex. Maybe that's why Hoover stated in one file on Dulles that Dulles had secret communist leanings. He didn't. Dulles did a lot of things, but supporting communism was not one of them. Number 42. Hoover's perverts. Despite Hoover's reported sexual orientation, he supported and took part in a war against American homosexuals, which became known as the Lavender Scare. This has been called the U.S. government's systematic persecution of homosexuals, people deemed perverted and sexually deviant. During the 1950s and 60s, hundreds of people, mostly men, lost their government jobs due to accusations that they liked or loved people of the same sex. In 1953 alone, the State Department said it had fired 425 staff due to their alleged homosexuality. You can't blame the FBI for all of this, but Hoover certainly played his part in the witch hunts along with McCarthy and the prosecutor Roy Cohn. Number 41. Truman's warning. President Harry Truman wasn't quite as on board with the hunt for homosexuals. In a statement he once made, he said, "We want no Gestapo or secret police. FBI is tending in that direction. They are dabbling in sex life scandals and plain blackmail." Edgar Hoover would give his right eye to take over, and all congressmen and senators are afraid of him. They were all scared of each other, but so much of what was happening was kept classified. Number 40. Official blackmail. Cohn himself was rumored to be a homosexual, although he always denied it, saying it was a smear campaign. In an interview in 1985, another journalist called him the most virulently anti-gay guy you could imagine. Yet the famous lobbyist Roger Stone said Cohn had a liking for the young and blonde of the human male species. Cohn was widely known to have represented some of the biggest names in the Italian-American mafia. Some of those people said Cohn kept photographs of Hoover with his male friends. It's believed that he kept those images for possible blackmail. Number 39. The bathroom bust. In 1956, a Harvard-educated astronomer, Dr. Franklin E. Kameny, who was hoping to go far in the USA space program, suddenly lost his job. He'd been attending an astronomy conference in San Francisco when someone busted down the door of a bathroom stall he was inhabiting with another man. Little did he know that he'd been one of the men who was listed in the thousands of documents in the FBI's very secret sex deviates file. His arrest wasn't the end of the matter. Number 38. The spying continues. After his arrest, Kameny was one of the 16 men who met at the Hay Adams Hotel in Washington, right across from the White House, to plan the foundation of a national gay rights organization named the Mattachine Society of Washington. You won't be surprised to hear that Hoover's men knew the meeting was taking place, despite it being kept a secret. A declassified 1,000-page FBI file stated that the hotel manager was listening to the meeting, and he went straight back to the FBI and told Hoover's desk what he'd heard. The FBI files say these men were a national security risk. Hoover actually had an informant in the society, leading to some men losing their jobs. It didn't stop there. Number 37. The tangled web. On August 28, 1963, the famed civil rights activist Martin Luther King gave his most renowned speech to a crowd of 250,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. King talked about black people living on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity, and he said he had a dream, which included that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. In the crowd were Kameny and other members of the Mattachine Society of Washington. The FBI was watching them. The agency not only feared black activism, but a classified report said King's speech might inspire the first ever public speech relating to gay activism. This had never been done in the U.S. The FBI was right. On April 17, 1965, the Society gave a speech in Washington in front of the White House, comparing their treatment to gays under Fidel Castro's government, which had just announced it was going to send its own so-called sexual deviants to labor camps. The media didn't really cover it, but the FBI was certainly watching, photographing license plates and faces. Now let's talk about one of the most controversial matters in FBI history. Number 36. The MLK Files. As you'll know, despite Martin Luther King's emphasis on nonviolent protests, he was regarded as a danger to American society by a large number of establishment figures. These figures were numerous since King fought for civil rights and labor rights and also took an anti-war stance. He was a veritable thorn in the side of people such as Allen Dulles and J. Edgar Hoover. It's hardly shocking then that the FBI had a big file on King. Thanks to Freedom of Information requests, we now know that the CIA did too, even though it wasn't supposed to get involved with domestic issues. Those files show the CIA wanted to use disinformation to discredit King in the media, the eternal go-to tactic that sadly usually works. The files show that the CIA said it had highly derogatory information on him, which it said included King having contact with pro-communist types. A separate CIA memo talked about the risk of King being assassinated, adding that this would backfire because it would make him a martyr. The CIA was right. He was assassinated in 1968 and he became a martyr. The Washington Post wrote, as he lay dying, the popular beatification was already underway. Martin Luther King Jr. general and martyr to the greatest moral crusade on the nation's racial battlefield. This video is about the FBI, not the CIA, but we thought it was important to show you that the FBI and CIA often worked in tandem. Now let's look at what the FBI planned to do with King. Number 35. The MLK Files 2. After the famous 1975 Church Committee investigation into abuses by the FBI, CIA, NSA, and IRS, it wrote, from December 1963 until his death in 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was the target of an intensive campaign by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to neutralize him as an effective civil rights leader. The surveillance showed that King had plenty of extramarital affairs, something the FBI leaked to the press. The surveillance also tried to make out that King was a communist, although, unlike the philandering, this wasn't true. There were more allegations against him, some of which were very serious, but these haven't been confirmed. More declassified files that should be released in 2027 might get closer to the truth. That's because, as it stands, some of the files are hard to interpret, but the original surveillance tapes, which may tell all, will be unsealed according to a judge's order in 2027. The next part is nothing less than unbelievable. Number 34. The Letter. The FBI's most outrageous effort to get rid of King was the so-called FBI King Letter. It was sent to him by the FBI, although anonymously. It was posted along with tape recordings from FBI wiretaps that were evidence of King's extramarital affairs. Part of the letter read, "The American public, the church organizations that have been helping, Protestants, Catholics, and Jews will know you for what you are, an evil beast. So will others who have backed you. You are done. King, there is only one thing left for you to do. There is but one way out for you. You better take it before your filthy, fraudulent self is bared to the nation." YouTube moderation won't allow us to tell you what they wanted King to do, but we think you can figure it out. It didn't work. Some people believe the FBI took matters a step further. Number 33. Killing King. There have been plenty of theories about the assassination of MLK. One of them comes from allegations made by a man named Lloyd Jowers, a former Memphis tavern owner, and another man named Donald Wilson, a former FBI agent. They suggest King was killed as part of a government conspiracy. Number 32. The Conspiracy. We won't get too deep into the weeds since that would be a show all itself, but the theories state that the man convicted of King's murder, James Earl Ray, either didn't kill King or was part of a bigger conspiracy, possibly involving the FBI and other officials who may have also been part of the JFK assassination. The theories, like with JFK, are not insubstantial. In 1979, the United States House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, said a conspiracy in the assassination of King was likely, adding that Ray could have been a scapegoat. In 1999, a jury at a Memphis civil suit reached a unanimous verdict. They said King was assassinated in a U.S. government conspiracy. There's more. Number 31. Coretta King. King's wife, Coretta, said that after looking at the evidence, she believed her husband was taken out by the government, or at least shady parts of the government. She said, "There is an abundance of evidence of a major high-level conspiracy in the assassination of my husband." She talked to Robert F. Kennedy, a man who believed his own brother John F. Kennedy might have been assassinated as part of a government conspiracy. RFK told her he'd try to get to the bottom of her husband's murder. King and RFK had had mixed relations in the past. While RFK had been the one to approve Hoover's wiretap on King, they agreed on many issues relating to war, poverty, and racism. King said he would support RFK's run for presidency. RFK later made a speech about King's death, saying, among other things, "What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love, wisdom, and compassion toward one another." Maybe such sentiments were lethal. RFK was murdered himself almost exactly 2 months later. Number 30. Hoover and JFK. In a now declassified memo 2 days after JFK was assassinated, Hoover emphasized that the public must be led to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone. Oswald, who'd just been murdered himself, was mentioned in the files made publicly available in 2017. In the memo, Hoover wrote, "There is nothing further on the Oswald case except that he is dead. He meant that's all people need to know, so leave matters alone." Hoover wasn't happy with the Dallas police force. Number 29. Hoover and Oswald. As many researchers have pointed out, the fact that Jack Ruby was able to walk right up to Oswald and shoot him is at the very least a bit strange. Ruby, who had connections with organized crime and allegedly also with Cuban exiles who'd worked with the CIA, had been an informant for the FBI. He should not have been able to get into the Dallas police headquarters so easily, say some of the conspiracy theorists, especially as someone had made an anonymous tip the night before that someone was going to kill Oswald. In his secret memo, Hoover said he told the Dallas police that there was a risk someone would kill Oswald. He wrote, "Oswald having been killed today after our warnings to the Dallas Police Department was inexcusable. It will allow, I am afraid, a lot of civil rights people to raise a lot of hell because he was handcuffed and had no weapon. There are bound to be some elements of our society who will holler their heads off that his civil rights were violated, which they were. It gets better." Number 28. More files released. In 1963, the FBI received a memo from CIA counterintelligence chief James Angleton. The memo had said just 25 minutes before JFK was shot, a man described as an anonymous tipster had made a call to a British news reporter and urged him to call the American embassy in London for some big news, and hung up. Number 27. Fireworks. Ruby also seemed to know something big was going to happen. Declassified FBI files showed that on the day of JFK's assassination, he told his FBI handler that something explosive was on its way. The released FBI file dated April 6, 1977 said, the informant stated that on the morning of the assassination, Ruby contacted him and asked if he would like to watch the fireworks. He was with Jack Ruby and standing at the corner of the Postal Annex building, facing the Texas School Book Depository building at the time of the shooting. Immediately after the shooting, Ruby left and headed toward the area of the Dallas Morning News building. Files like these have turned non-skeptics into skeptics, as well as what comes next. Number 26. Another letter. The Justice Department in 1975 said it was investigating a letter that Oswald had delivered in person to the FBI Dallas office just before JFK was murdered. The letter explained how he would blow up the office if the FBI didn't stop harassing his wife, Marina. It is true that Agent James P. Hosty Jr. had visited the house where Marina was staying. He had wanted to talk to her about her entry into the United States, something her husband evidently didn't like. The letter was left with reception, but destroyed shortly after JFK was killed. The New York Times wrote, FBI officials were understood today to be distressed over the letter incident, which until a few weeks ago had not been known outside the Bureau and not widely known within it. Many years later, Hosty admitted that he'd been ordered to destroy the letter by J. Gordon Shanklin, the then chief of the FBI operations in Dallas. Shanklin denied ever seeing the letter or even knowing about it. Hosty said Shanklin was quite agitated and upset about the note and told him to destroy it, but he didn't. Then, 2 days after JFK died, Hosty, on orders from Shanklin, really did destroy it by ripping it up and flushing it down the toilet. Number 25. What the FBI knew. Some people say Oswald was an FBI informant. Yet William C. Sullivan, one of the highest-ranking FBI officials, wrote in a memo on January 30, 1964, to Assistant FBI Director A.H. Belmont that Oswald was never an FBI informant, was never paid money for information, was never assigned any symbol number. Number 24. Hoover's worries. As you now know, Hoover was worried that people would start thinking more than one person had killed the JFK. Just before Oswald's death, Hoover stated in a memo, "Last night we received a call from our Dallas office from a man talking in a calm voice and saying he was a member of a committee organized to kill Oswald. That's why he called the Dallas cops and told them that they should keep an eye on Oswald and ensure no one got near him." Now let's take a look at when the FBI became killers. We'll return to the topic of Oswald later. Number 23. The Black Messiah. The FBI was also partial to the art of assassination, it seems. One such man who felt the brunt of the FBI's wrath was Fred Hampton, an activist for the Black Panthers whom Hoover called the Black Messiah. Prior to taking part in his execution, the FBI tried to sow the seeds of disunity in the party by planting their own men among the Panthers. A series of memos Hoover wrote shows that he was willing to go to the most extreme lengths to wipe out these activists. Number 22. The Hit. On December 4, 1964, when Hampton was 21, the FBI orchestrated an armed raid with the Chicago police on Hampton's apartment at 2337 West Monroe Street on Chicago's west side. At the time, Hampton was with his friend and bodyguard, William O'Neill. Little did Hampton know that O'Neill was working with the FBI. That night, he spiked Hampton's drink with a strong drug, although it's debated to this day what that drug was. The upshot was Hampton falling asleep. The hit squad, armed with an apartment layout thanks to O'Neill, busted through the door. A declassified memo stated about the floor plan that this information is of considerable value in consideration of a special payment for informant requested in Chicago letter. O'Neill was paid $300 by the FBI, something that would later help prove the FBI had played a major role in what looked like an assassination. Hampton was still sleeping with his pregnant girlfriend when the guns started blasting. Other Black Panthers were also sleeping. They first shot 22-year-old Mark Clark, who was sitting guard with a shotgun on his lap in the living room. He died instantly. The gun went off as he fell. Then all hell broke loose. They fired between 82 and 99 rounds, spraying the walls and hitting several people. No one had the chance to fire back. Hampton's girlfriend, who was less than a month away from giving birth, was hit but survived. Police dragged her away from Hampton, who'd been trying to shield her from the bullets. In a later court case, her lawyer said she heard one officer ask, "Is he, Hampton, still alive?" Then she heard 2 gunshots and another officer said, "He's good and dead now." It was later confirmed that Hampton had been in a drugged haze and never even got out of the bed. The autopsy said he'd been shot at close range with 2 bullets to the head. This looked like premeditated murder by the FBI and the Chicago cops. The media echoed what State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan said, that there had been a pitched gun battle. In 1970, a judge ruled on the deaths of Clark and Hampton to be justifiable homicide. But in a years-long civil case, a group of defendants accepted a settlement of $1.85 million. Number 21. The files come out. The assassination of Hampton was controversial, given some people thought the police had rightly acted against violent and dangerous radicals, and others said that this was a premeditated hit on activists. Much of the public at first went with the second theory, but then those declassified files revealed that this was all orchestrated by the FBI. It wasn't a police visit gone wrong, it was a planned hit. The New York Times in 1982 wrote, "The FBI had played a significant role in events leading to the raid, as part of its counterintelligence program against groups that J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau's director, perceived as subversives." This was all about the time that a lot of dirt came out on the FBI. Number 20. White radicals. The FBI went after anyone that they believed was radical, not just black activists. One of their targets was the cheeky and quick-thinking Liverpudlian John Lennon of Beatles fame. His anti-war stance and all that give peace a chance talk wasn't welcome in the US, where he was now living. Not welcome by the FBI, at least. Most Americans loved the Beatles and liked Lennon's solo work, but such were the polarizing times that many others also hated Lennon. For a man who'd sung about being an eggplant, the FBI had taken him very, very seriously. There was a cache of files on Lennon as long as your arm. In one of the documents Hoover wrote in 1972, Lennon has taken an interest in extreme left-wing activities in Britain and is known to be a sympathizer of Trotskyist communities in England. The FBI had not wanted to release any of these files, citing national security concerns. They also reported that Lennon had a friend named Linda who owned a parrot that interjects right on whenever the conversation gets rousing. Arguably the biggest threat to national security was, at the moment, how embarrassing this looked for the FBI. How much time and money had been spent on watching a talking hippie parrot? Lennon was soon out of the FBI's hair anyway. He was assassinated in the street in New York City by a man named Mark Chapman in December 1980. Peace was evidently not going to be given a chance. We should say here that some FBI agents did not believe in some of those harsh tactics. A declassified file shows Hoover's response to an agent who complained about the job at hand. Hoover said, "You state that the Bureau under the CIP should not attack programs of community interest. You state that this is because many prominent humanitarians, both white and black, are interested in the program, as well as churches which are actively supporting it. You have obviously missed the point." Number 19. Murder and mayhem. The FBI had a file on a man who caused absolute havoc on American streets when he took part in the CIA's mind control program, MKUltra. The man was a former Narcotics Bureau agent named George Hunter White, a heavy drinker and a drug taker who'd helped make arrests of drug takers in the 1930s under Harry Anslinger, the Commissioner of Narcotics. White knew the streets. He knew the dealers, the gangsters, the hitmen. So the CIA got him to run a safe house under Operation Midnight Climax, in which White and other agents watched through two-way mirrors as prostitutes they'd paid spiked their clients' drinks with LSD. White also went into bars and put LSD in people's drinks. He did this to his wife's friends, some of whom needed years of counseling after. How does a man who does these kind of things avoid FBI detection? The answer is he didn't. The FBI had a file on White stating he'd once attended a British sabotage school run in Canada. This was better known as Camp X. It was described as a place to learn sabotage techniques, subversion, intelligence gathering, lock-picking, explosives training, radio communications, recruiting techniques for partisans, the art of silent killing, and unarmed combat. White called it the School of Murder and Mayhem. White, who is undoubtedly one of the craziest Americans who ever worked in law enforcement and deserves 10 movies to be made about him, once said in a letter to Anslinger, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" He also said the R word, which YouTube won't let us utter, related to sexual matters. Number 18. The FBI was on to White. According to White's diaries, which were found after he died from alcohol-related liver disease, the FBI might have been on to him and his safe houses. One of his diary entries reads, 81 Bedford Safe House, call Anslinger. He says the FBI knows about it. M has been pumped by the FBI, neighbors, etc. Another file the FBI had on White, which was later declassified, said White was part of an ultra-secret assignment as a consultant. This was related to MKUltra, of course. It wasn't something the CIA was going to share with the FBI. In a separate related file also sent to Hoover, it says that Redacted handled FBI agents some of the knockout drops used by White and also some of the truth serum White had used. The latter was probably LSD. As for the knockout drops, take your pick. Number 17. Mr. Olson's fall. The FBI also had files on Frank Olson, the American biological warfare scientist who worked on MKUltra. He very mysteriously flew out of a hotel window in New York in 1953 after it was discovered that he might open his mouth in regard to sensitive information about MKUltra and the novel ways the CIA interrogated people. It's hard to know what the FBI made of his death, since much of the file is redacted. It looks like to protect certain names. Olson's family has claimed that he was thrown out of the window, and the evidence suggests that's a real possibility, but no one has ever been arrested over it. Number 16. Alleged smear campaign. As we've said, the FBI has engaged in smear campaigns in the past. It may have been done in the not-so-distant past, although we don't have the declassified files yet. In 2011, a former CIA officer said he'd been asked to collect damaging information on the Middle East expert and Iraq war critic, Professor Juan Cole. The University of Michigan academic sued both the CIA and FBI for what he said was a targeted smear campaign against him by the two agencies on the orders of President George W. Bush. Number 15. Definite smear campaign. Thanks to declassified files, we now know on March 6, 1959, Hoover told his staff to investigate subversive factors in the media, either journalists or publishers, who he said could be discrediting our American way of life. The practice was to get dirt on such people so the U.S. public would ignore whatever they said. Number 14. The FBI abroad. The CIA is usually the agency that affects change abroad. However, after and during the war, the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration sent 700 FBI agents to Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and other parts of Latin America under the Special Intelligence Service. This was mostly top secret, dedicated to finding Nazis, Nazi spies, or smugglers and propagandists working for the Axis powers. Hoover then shifted the SIS's focus more toward communism. A book on the matter states that, unlike the CIA, the FBI did not take executive action in Latin America, meaning removing politicians and activists. Though, through extensive surveillance, Hoover only compiled dossiers on foreign leftists he deemed possibly troublesome. Number 13. The KKK. On March 25, 1965, the civil rights activist Viola Liuzzo was driving a car from Selma to Montgomery in the state of Alabama when four members of the Ku Klux Klan started to follow her and Leroy Motton, a young black man who was in the car with her. At one point, the chase car pulled up alongside them and opened fire. The reason for this attack was Liuzzo's support of civil rights and voting rights for African Americans. Motton survived, Liuzzo did not. One of the men in the chase car was actually an FBI informant. It didn't look too good that an agent was with violent racist people, so Hoover decided to do something about it. The U.S. public discovered many years later that he started a smear campaign against Liuzzo to take people's minds off the FBI. He fashioned a completely untrue story that she was an unstable harlot who had left her kids and husband to go cause trouble in the South. Hoover made up a file on her, sent it to politicians, and leaked it to the media. Part of it said the police had found puncture marks in her arm, indicating recent use of a hypodermic needle. And it added that she was sitting very, very close to that African-American man in the car, that it has the appearance of a necking party. Only through the Freedom of Information Act in 1978 did the public ever discover that this was a bunch of cruel lies. The problem with smear campaigns is that they tend to work because they come from what people believe are trusted sources. Liuzzo was no drug user and was not a cheat, but that's what many people thought for a long time. The three killers were convicted of conspiracy to intimidate African Americans under the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act. They were handed 10-year prison sentences, while the informant acted as a witness to the crime and went into the Federal Witness Protection Program. Now let's take a look at Hoover's take on UFOs. Number 12. UFOs. In September 1947, Hoover wrote to Air Force General George McDonnell about the FBI's role in the spate of UFO sightings. Hoover said he was not interested in relieving this Air Force of running down incidents, which in many cases turned out to be ashcan covers, toilet seats, and whatnot. We guess Hoover wasn't much of a believer. 4 days later, he sent a memo to his field offices and told them to end any joint investigations they had with the Air Force regarding UFOs. Number 11. UFOs 2. Even so, from 1947 to 1953, you can find a trove of documents relating to UFO sightings in the USA. There are reports of flying discs, flying saucers, and in one July 11, 1947 report, a case of a woman in Twin Falls, Idaho, who said she saw a saucer with a saucer in the manner of symbols. This contraption, which was said to have been handed to the police, had a dome on top. The FBI report noted this might not have been a prank, although it certainly sounded like one. Pranking was a dangerous business, given that Hoover and the CIA would sometimes surveil UFO organizations and UFO enthusiasts in the possibility they were subversive elements. Number 10. Torture training. In Latin America under Operation Condor, the CIA sponsored state terrorism, and its infamous torture manuals played a part. Trade unionists, journalists, writers, artists, and even regular citizens suspected of being left-wing activists were tortured and sometimes disappeared. That is some dark stuff, but we usually don't associate the FBI with such torture. Even so, declassified files showed that the FBI did at times follow the CIA's KUBARK counterintelligence interrogation methods. After the manual was declassified in 1997, we learned that what the American Civil Liberties Union called a gruesome torture program was, at times, indeed used by the FBI. Now let's look at how torture was implemented. Number 9. Torture practice. As you know, during the War on Terror, men called high-value detainees were treated to controversial enhanced interrogation techniques. The Guardian talked about an alleged terrorist named Abu Zubaydah, who was arrested by the FBI, CIA, and Pakistani cops in 2002. He is still detained, yet has never been charged. He's kind of famous for the torture that happened to him, something he took to the European Court of Human Rights in 2014, and was awarded damages that his lawyer said he donated to torture victims. The FBI took part in some of that torture, which included being kept in a coffin for 11 days, beaten against walls, hung by his hands for days on end, waterboarded 83 times, kept in stress positions, and sleep-deprived. He got what the British called the full Monty at black sites, not just in Poland but in Thailand, Afghanistan, and Northern Africa. Number 8. Torture in Thailand. Thailand has a pretty bad track record where torture is concerned, which makes it the ideal place to have a black site. Human Rights Watch said the cops in one province of Thailand tortured youths, in some cases crushed their testicles, and then buried them after hanging them. This was when Thailand had its notorious uptick in the war on drugs in 2003. The cops were accused of abducting and killing at least 24 people in just one province, Kalasin. It was completely illegal, of course, but it also made Thailand a good place for the CIA to have black sites. The CIA has had secret sites in Thailand for decades. How this ties to the FBI is we now know some FBI agents were sent to that black site in Thailand during the War on Terror. The New York Times reported about this, saying the FBI usually has a strong moral compass. It gave the example of FBI agents not liking what they saw at those Thai black sites, saying its agents, disgusted with the violence they saw at a secret CIA prison in Thailand, walked out. The same article said 9 FBI agents worked for the CIA in Thailand. While on the record as being FBI, they were accused of torture and ended up in the courts. The public only found out about them in 2021 when the FBI declassified the relevant files. Number 7. JFK again. In 2022, after more JFK files were declassified, it was reported that the first recorded conversation between Hoover and President Lyndon Johnson was mysteriously erased. One of the memos sent by Hoover, dated November 24, 1963, stated, "The thing that I am concerned about, and so is Mr. Katzenbach, Deputy Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach, is having something issued so we can convince the public that Oswald is the real criminal." Number 6. Fake news. You might have heard about a man who is sometimes said to be one of the most influential Americans of the 20th century. His name was Henry Luce, and he was the founder of Time Magazine, Life Magazine, Fortune, and Sports Illustrated. He was also a friend of Allen Dulles, who with Luce helped to shape the public's opinion of the world affairs during Dulles' time at the CIA. The U.S. media watchdog FAIR wrote, "After the formation of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947, Luce, a close friend of U.S. spy master Allen Dulles, privately urged his correspondents to cooperate with the agency." Luce also joined Dulles on the board of directors of the National Committee for a Free Europe, a CIA front that was said to sometimes send money to neo-Nazi organizations to control leftist movements in Europe. We now know that many American journalists during the Cold War were paid CIA operatives. The New York Times said at least 12 worked for newspapers abroad, shaping narratives there. Rolling Stone said in the 1970s, at least 400 U.S. journalists had secretly carried out assignments for the CIA, with news organizations including the New York Times, Time, Life, ABC, CBS News, Newsweek, the New York Herald Tribune, and the Associated Press. But the FBI also had assets in the media when it was trying to discredit certain individuals during its COINTELPRO program. It would leak information to friendly journalists who would print these stories without many questions. Declassified FBI documents show how agents were directed to use established local news media contacts. The Church Committee said these fake news stories were to wage a secret war in those citizens it considers threats to the established order. We also now know the FBI secretly investigated the Pentagon Papers journalist Ben Bagdikian. They looked at his credit card purchases, communications, and travel plans, and they used fake IDs to interview his friends and neighbors while trying to get the dirt on him and find out where he'd got the leaks. They also found his employment data and his immigration file. In one memo, the FBI HQ told its field offices to investigate all newspapers that had published anything on the leaks. The FBI liked leaking certain information, but the Pentagon Papers were not the kinds of leaks the agency supported. The leaker was Daniel Ellsberg, who was also subjected to a smear campaign. A freedom of press advocate said recently, "The fact that this happened over 45 years ago and we're just finding out about it now makes you wonder how many other times the government went to this length to spy on journalists in secret." The worrying question is, do such smear campaigns still exist? Number 5. Starting a fight. In 1969, as part of COINTELPRO, the FBI sent an anonymous letter to the leader of a Chicago street gang that went by the name of the Blackstone Rangers. While they were allied with the Black Panthers, the FBI had told the gang leader that Fred Hampton, the guy who you now know the FBI later killed, had taken a contract out on his life. In a memo, an FBI official said this should get the Blackstone Rangers in a fight with the Panthers. He remarked how the Rangers were willing to use extreme violence. That same year, in another memo, the FBI said its tactics were working, writing shootings, beatings, and a high degree of unrest continues to prevail in the ghetto area of southeast San Diego. A substantial amount of unrest is directly attributable to this program. So much for keeping the peace on the streets. Number 4. Starting a fight. 2. Also as part of COINTELPRO, the FBI tried to get the Mafia into a deadly fight with the Communists. In a memo dated July 31, 1977, the FBI said it had an operation that involved setting the La Cosa Nostra against the Communists and vice versa. It was called Operation Hoodwink. In another memo, the FBI admitted that neither side seemed interested in getting into a bloody battle after 2 years of trying. They even wrote letters to newspapers from apparent workers who supported labor unions. One such letter was from a man calling himself The Worker. He was mightily upset, he said, about the Mafia and its loan sharks extorting money from innocent victims while going about their other nefarious activities. This was supposed to get the two groups into a firefight, taking each other out and saving the FBI the effort. The sharks, it seems, didn't bite. There were more letters, One consists of a man saying his communist brother-in-law, who'd just been to Russia, was coming home to get rid of the hoodlums and the unions. They also sent letters to the 3 top mafia leaders from apparently a communist who was blaming them for bombing the communist HQ. But as we said, the plan didn't work. Mobsters versus commies didn't happen. Number 3. The bad informants. One of the most embarrassing moments for the FBI was when it came out that one of their informants was a serial killer. He was Scott Kimball, who murdered at least 4 people in the early 2000s. The FBI had used him after he was caught in various fraud activities, but the information he gave agents was almost always untrue. He also used his cover to commit murders. It's hard to say how many informants the FBI has all over the US, but it's generally reported to be about 15,000. According to a report, it was only 1,500 in 1975. Forbes wrote in 2015, FBI and other agencies paid informants $548 million in recent years, with many committing authorized crimes. The same report said that, according to a Freedom of Information request, there were 22,800 crime authorizations given by the FBI from 2011 to 2014, meaning that people were authorized to commit crimes. The agency explained, "It's not that we're ignoring these crimes, it's that we're letting the informant engage in the criminal activity for the purpose of furthering our investigation. These are not major crimes, it seems, but informants have used their protection to get away with terrible deeds, such as the mass murderer Philip Arthur Thompson." According to a recent Netflix true crime documentary series, American Conspiracy: The Octopus Murders, a crazy documentary, Thompson was a sadistic man involved with heinous crimes for many years. But no matter how horrifically violent his crimes were, he had a knack of staying out of prison. We'll say no more about that documentary, lest we end up having an accident. Now, to be fair to the FBI, without informants, the job is almost impossible. And let's remember, the job mostly entails keeping people safe. Today's show is mostly about the hidden bad stuff. Number 2. The FBI spy. One of the most infamous spies the US has ever had worked for the FBI. His name was Robert Hanssen. He started working for the FBI in 1976. Unbeknownst to anyone, he started passing information to the Soviets in 1979. Over the years, he told the Russians about a multi-million-dollar eavesdropping tunnel under the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. Despite the high cost of the tunnel, the Americans barely got anything useful. Little did they know that Hanssen had told the Russians about it. He was paid about $130,000 in today's money for that information. He gave the Russians information about the U.S. nuclear program. He told them about American spies, which led to the arrest and imprisonment of 3 U.S. sources. 2 more Americans were executed because of his spying. It's thought he was paid $1.4 million, $600,000 cash and diamonds, and about $800,000 right into one of his bank accounts. It cost the FBI another $7 million to get information from a KGB agent that would lead to them catching Hanssen. Today, after being called the most traitorous actions imaginable against a country governed by the rule of law, he is 79 and wallowing away in a high-security prison. Number 1. Undercover. One of the most frightening jobs in the world is that of an undercover agent who has infiltrated an organization. The name Joe Pistone springs to mind. He was the FBI agent who, from 1976 to 1981, pretended to be a criminal named Donnie Brasco as he infiltrated the mob. His work led to around 100 convictions, not to mention the murders that took place when he left his mafia in chaos. Over the years, FBI agents have infiltrated neo-Nazi groups. They've had people in environmental activist outfits and feminist organizations. And they recently put a pink-haired woman who said her name was Chelsea into a racial justice group. While we guess most people, for the right amount of money, wouldn't mind risking the racial justice group finding out who they were, you certainly wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of drug gangs. It's happened. Agent Charles Leo Reed was buying cocaine from a surveilled drug dealer in Philadelphia in 1996 when he was shot dead. At the time, his name wasn't published in the news stories, since undercover agents are always kept very secret, even within the FBI. Fortunately, undercover agents are not killed very often. The Washington Post said in 2023 that Reed was the last undercover agent to be killed on the job. Infiltrating drug gangs is a risky business and not something the FBI would do without giving it a lot of thought. But agents do pose as other kinds of criminals. We'll finish this video with a recent story of a fake FBI website selling murder for hire. A man got in touch with the site and wrote an application for a hitman, not knowing he was talking to an agent. He was good at killing, he said, since he had been a soldier. He wrote, I'm looking for a job that pays well and is related to my military experience, shooting and killing the marked target, so I can support my kid on the way. What can I say? I enjoy doing what I do. So if I can find a job that is similar to it, such as this one, put me in, coach." He was hired. The agent later met him in a park and gave him the target package with photographs, the name, address, and other information about the guy he was supposed to take out. He also got $2,500. Later that day, he was arrested. Now you need to watch 50 Insane Facts About the CIA You Never Knew, or have a look at Most Wanted Americans by Interpol 2024.